Jai Hind to everyone. Today in this video lecture, I am going to discuss about XML schema lecture 2. Basically, it is a further extension of my previous video lecture that I have covered in XML schema. So, it is better before going through this video lecture, you can refer my previous lecture also. So, in this lecture, we are going to discuss some important part of XML schema. The first part is restriction. So, it is possible that the content that we are going to display to the audience or you are going to transfer to any other location, you can put some restrictions. So, restriction can be given in the elements and restriction can be given on the attribute contents. So, if you put some restrictions, accordingly the XML will be validated. For example, if you given a data type date like the content of an element or of attribute should be of date and you are giving some data like string format, then it is an invalid XML. So, this is one way of giving the restriction, defining the type of content of the element attribute, and accordingly you need to give the content, otherwise your XML will be invalid. Now, you can have some many other restrictions also, and these type of restrictions are called facets. So, here we can say putting the restriction on content of XML data. One other way of explanation is we call as a facets. So, restrictions are used to define acceptable values for the XML elements or attributes. So, here again I am emphasizing that restriction you can put on the elements also, and restriction you can put on the attributes also. Second understanding of this slide is that restrictions are also called the facets. So, facet is another name putting the restriction on the content of XML data. Now, going to discuss about restriction of the values. Here you can see it is an XML schema. This is an XML schema, and here we are going to define an element of XML. Name of that element is age. Now, we are just putting the restrictions on this value of the age. Example, the value of the age should be between 0 to 120. Here you can take any value. Here in this example, we have taken the value from 0 to 120. So, if any value other than this range will be called as an invalid value. So, put this restriction. If you transferring the data with the help of XML, the value should be within this range. Again, the value is of type integer. So, also define the type of the value in this XML schema. So, this age is a simple type of element, and we are putting the restriction. Base of the restriction is integer, meaning the content of this age element should be of type integer. Then, this is the two way to give in the restriction for the range. Here is the minimum inclusion and maximum inclusion. That is the lowest value and maximum value. And whatever the value you will be specified, that will be the part of the range. That's why it is written inclusive. Here 120 is mentioned. So, 120 is the part of this range. So, we have written as a inclusive, and they are closing the restriction. So, this part we are defining a restriction on the content of XML value. Restriction is it is of type integer and the value between 0 to 120. And this element of simple type I already discussed. There is two major different types of XML element. One is simple type, second is complex type. In this video also I discuss in detail about the complex type. This age is a simple type because it is not taking any other attribute, it is only the element. That's why we call as a simple type element. This is the end of the element. So, in this slide, I am discussing about how to put the restrictions on the values of an element. Here the restriction is related to the range of the values. Next, we are putting the restriction on the set of values. That is number of values are there, is no range is there. There is a set of values, some specific values are there, and a set is defined. So, for example, we want the value should be from a set of values. So, here you can define that set. Example, we have defining an element car, and I want the name of the car only from three brand. One brand is Audi, Golf and BMW. So, it is a set of values. So, car is defined as a simple type of element, and the value that we are going to give this car element is of type of string. So, we are putting the restriction base of access string. So, whatever the value we are giving in the car element, it is of type of string. If other than string, like we are giving integer value, the car data will be considered as a invalid data. So, this sentence defining the type of value that we are giving as a part of content of the car element. Now, what are the set? The set is defined as an enumeration. So, there are three values in this enumeration. So, we have used three elements: enumeration, enumeration and enumeration, and we have we have defining the values Audi, Golf and BMW. So, here we can see that we have defined a set of values. Set of values are Audi, Golf and value. There is a three values are there. So, this car element can take only one element from this set of values. Can take only one element from Audi, Golf or BMW. So, this is the way we are giving the restriction on the set of values. Next is talking about more detail about the complex element. So, in the previous video lecture, I already talked about there is a two major category of the XML element. One is simple and second is complex. When we are defining the XML schema for an XML file. So, XML schema will understand two categories of XML element. One is simple, second is complex. So, now we are going in detail about the complex element. So, complex element is an XML element that contains other elements. So, if element within that element we have other elements, we call as a complex elements and or attributes. So, if there is an element and we are putting an attribute in that element, so we call that element also as a complex element. In simple terms, if an element consists of an attribute, it is an complex element. If an element consists of other element, or you can say nesting of the element is possible, then we call as a complex element. So, empty element can also be called as a complex element. These are some listing. Elements that contain only the text with attribute is also a complex element. Elements that contain only other elements, it is also a complex element. Elements that contain both other elements and text, it is possible we have an element that consists of element as well as text also. So, that is also called the complex element. So, each of these elements may contain attributes. Now, look for some example of complex element. So, here it is an empty element. Name of the element is product. But in this empty element, we define and one attribute. So, we call as a complex element. PID is the attribute of the product element. So, product element is a complex element because employee with contains only. Next is second part. We have the employee element, and within the employee element, we have some other elements. So, employee is one of the element, and within this employee element, we have two elements, first name and last name. So, we call employee as a complex element. Remember, here is the employee is the complex element. Now, some other part, complex element, it is a food, is the complex element which contains only the text. So, it is an element, it contains only the text, but we call as a complex element because it has one attribute. So, any element, any element that has only attribute, we call that element as a complex element. So, complex XML element description, we are talking about this one, is contain both elements and the text. So, description is the complex element. Why it is complex? Because it has some text as well as one element also. So, description is the complex element that consists of element as well as text. So, these are very good examples of the complex element. This slide is covering every different types of complex element. It is covering the empty elements, it is covering the element within the element, it is also covering element within the element with text. So, all different types of complex elements are considered here. Now, it is an example how to define a complex element. In simple terms, if an element consists of other element, we call as in complex elements. So, this is the one way to define the complex element. I have already covered here also. In this previous slide, I have covered what is the meaning of complex elements. Now, it is an XML file. It is a complex element because implies the complex element. It consists of two other elements, first name and last name. So, it is an XML file. Now, we are going to define the XML schema for this XML file. So, what are the way of defining the XML schema for the complex element? So, we are going to discuss about creating an XML file for this XML schema file for this XML file. So, there are two ways to define the XML schema. Again, I am repeating it. This is the XML file and there are two different ways to define the XML schema for this XML file. The first way to define the XML schema for this XML file. The first way is we define the XML schema for this employee. We are using the access to define the element as an employee. It is a complex element because in this element we have defined two more elements, first name and last name. So, we have defined first name and last name and it is a complex type. Which one is the complex type? Employee is the complex type and it has two elements, first name and last name. Now, we want to ensure that when we define the first name and last name within the employee element, then first name element should come first, then last name element should come second. So, we want to put the sequence. If this sequence must be there and it is not available, then we call as a XML file as an invalid file. Now, to maintain the sequence of the element, we are using the here sequence, sequence indicator. So, sequence ensure that there should be first name, then after should be last name within this employee element. So, this is the one way to define the XML schema for the XML file. Here is the description for you. I explain what it is written in this description. Here you can see the sequence indicator is to put the element should be in the sequence and we are defining the employee as a complex element. The second way to define the XML schema for XML file. This is the XML file. This is the second way we are going to define the XML schema for this XML file. In the second way, it is possible that we will make a type. Name of this type is person info. Because the first name and last name, it can be used many other XML file. Instead of writing first name and last name in every element, better to define a type for this first name and last name. So, I have defined a person info is a complex type. In this complex type, we have defined two elements, first name and last name. Now, this or you can say user defined type is already prepared. I want to put the first name and last name in my employee element, within my employee element. So, we define element name, no need to go for the detailing. This is needed in many where. So, I already defined a user defined type like complex type and name of this type is person info. So I just use type and name of the person info. So this employee automatically consists of two elements, first name and last name. This is the second way to define the XML schema for the XML file. This is the first way. Here is no type is mentioned. This is the second way. Here the type is mentioned. We have user defined type, which is already given in the type equal to person info. Next, if you are using the second option, it gives the flexibility, because the first name and last name can be used anywhere, not for only employee. It can be used for the student, it can be used for the member, it can use anywhere whenever a name is needed. So instead of putting in the first format, every time if you define the student and if you define the employee, if you define the faculty, you need the first name and last name should be defined again and again. In the second option, we have created a user defined type. Whenever it is needed first name and last name, just use the type of equal to person info. The first name and last name will be included automatically. Here you can see it. Yes, here you can see we need the first name and last name within the employee. So we have defined the employee, type equal to person info. We need first name and last name in the student also. So we have defined the student element, type person info. We need first name and last name in the member element also. So we have defined the member, person info, first name and last name. So person info is defined with the first name and last name. As a sequence, you define one time and then it can be repeatedly can be used in any other elements. Second, suppose we have defined a user defined person info. I want to add some other element, like you want to extend this person info. What is the way to extend it? So we have extend, again we define complex type full person name, and we want to add address, city and country, and before the address, city and country we want the first name and last name. So full person info is the extension of person info. So we define new user defined data type, which is based on the previous user defined data type. Previous user defined data type is person info. New user defined data type is full person info. We have inherited, or you can say we have taken the data of person info in this full person info data type. Data of person info is to define the first name and last name, which is already the part of full person info because of this extension. Then we add some extra element. Extra element is address, city and country. You also define the type of this extra element is string. So this is the one way. If you define one user data type, you can extend it. So this is the way of extension of the already defined user data type, or you can say already defined complex type that you can extend for the another complex type. Now some more example of the complex type that contains elements only. So like person can have the first name and last name. If you're not going in this previous approach, that is you are not following this second approach, this is the second approach, this one is the second approach, then in this case you have to define here. So element person is defined, it is of complex type, and two element is defined within the person is first name and last name. Both are complex type and it is of sequence. Sequence is the indicator to show that the first name and last name should be written within the person in sequence. First name is the first element after the person, within the person, and last name should be the second element, that is should be written after the first name. So sequence indicator is an or you can say make it compulsory to define the sequence of the element. Next we have complex element that contains only the text. So, here you can say shoe size is an element and it may have any content. It may have text, it may have number also, it can have anything. In this example, it is an integer that will define later. So, it is an XML file that has an element name is shoe size and the attribute name is country and it can have any data here within this element. So, here we are going, there is no other element, but we can have any text. So, it is an XML file that I want to define the XML schema for this XML file. So, XML schema for this XML file is first define the element shoe size. It is a complex type because we have already one attribute. I already discussed any element has an attribute we call as a complex type. So, shoe size complex type and this shoe size has only the text element. So, the content of this shoe size will be element would be of very simple content. So, we have written the simple content and it can have any string. So, we have written the extension base as an integer, but we want to put the value in integer, that is why we have written the integer here. If you want a string, then you can write the string here. So, I want only the number in this element shoe size. So, therefore, we have written the integer and then it is the attribute. What is the name of the attribute is country and type of the attribute is string. So, understand element within the element contained is of type integer and this element we have defined an attribute. Name of the attribute is country and the value of that country of type of string. So, within the element the content type will be integer, but within the attribute the content type should be of string. So, we have closed simple content and complex type. So, this is we define the XML schema. It is a XML file and XML schema for XML file is defined here. You can see. Next, we have complex type with mixed content. So, if you want to mix, this is a one of the XML file with mixed content. Later is name of the element and we have text as well as we have element also. So, we are going to define XML schema for this element. Now, this is the XML schema. We have defined the later mixed equal to true. It is a complex type because later element consists of element as well as text. Both different types are there in the within the later. So, we have given mix equal to true. Then we define the sequence. When we are going to write the element within the later element, sequence should follow. It can have name and it can have order ID. Content of the name attribute should be of string. Content of the order ID should be of positive integer. Then one more element is defined, ship date, and content of ship date will be of date type. So, here you can see that we have defined the later. Later consists of mixed value. It consists of element as well as it consists of text also. So, end of the sequence and complex type. Now, it is a node to enable the character data to appear between the child elements of later. The mixed attribute must be true. So, a later is an element here that consists of text as well as elements. Now, sequence indicator we have already discussed, it meaning that it defines the order. So, in this we have defined the order. First should be name, order ID and ship date. So, this sequence must be followed if sequence indicator is mentioned. If element is not in the proper sequence, then XML file should be invalid. So, till now I discussed about some different part of the XML schema. So, this is my second lecture of the XML schema. In the previous lecture of my XML schema, that was the first lecture, I discussed about the basic of XML schema, how to create the XML schema. Now, in this video, I discuss about what are the restrictions of the XML schema and some detailing about how to define the XML schema for complex element. Thank you very much.